I will now take a minute of your time to introduce the collaborating organizations. University of Chicago Center in Delhi is part of the university's 6 global centers, as in Hong Kong, Beijing, Paris, London, and Latin America. The center in Delhi provides a base for research, teaching, and dialogue among scholars from the university and around the world. It provides a platform for the University of Chicago faculty to bring their intellectual expertise and their global collaboration to work on key development challenges in India, explore locally relevant solutions, and use the learnings to inform policy in the region. Our faculty bring in diverse sets of expertise on a range of thematic areas, from science to energy, medicine, public health, business, law, policy, culture, society, art. We have been the first in many areas, whether it is to bring robotic surgery into the field of pediatric urology or engendering medical education in India. We've led it all the way through free and open inquiry and strive to deepen scholarship in each of the areas we have worked in. After all, from an university with more than 90 Nobel laureates, we have a legacy to live up to. Our other co-organizers for this event, STAGE, that is Scientists, Technologists, and Artists Generating Exploration, is a full-scale laboratory embedded within a science and engineering school devoted to collaborations among scientists and artists. Specifically, it is at the helm of one of the 4 core research themes, that of art, science, and technology at the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, PME. PME integrates science and engineering to address global challenges from molecular level up. PME applies molecular level science to design of advanced devices, processes, and technologies. Organized by interdisciplinary research teams, the school seeks to develop solutions to important societal issues and to educate the next generation of leaders in the fast-growing field of molecular engineering. Now about this evening's event. The highlights of this event are the screening of the film Downstream, followed by a panel discussion, which will be moderated by Professor Nancy Kawalek. Nancy is a professor and distinguished fellow in the Arts, Science, and Technology at the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, PME. As an artist and innovator, specializing in creation and development of theater, film, and related artistic endeavors inspired by science and technology, she is the founder and director of STAGE, that is Scientists, Technologies, and Artists Generating Exploration, a full-scale laboratory embedded within PME devoted to research collaborations among scientists and artists. In addition to her work as a director and writer, Nancy is a professional New York theater-trained actor whose credits include roles on Broadway, off-Broadway, and in regional theater. She has acted in films, televisions, numerous commercials, and on national public radio. So ladies and gentlemen, now you know what are you in for. An exciting event forward. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Lenny. And I'm very pleased to be here to commemorate World Water Day with you, with all of you. And thank you everyone for joining us. A brief introduction to what you're about to see. Downstream is a short film by a very talented young filmmaker named Ellen Askey. Ellen worked with our STAGE lab at the University of Chicago for all of her 4 years of study at the university. And upon graduation, she continued to work with STAGE under a Metcalf grant from the University of Chicago's Jeff Metcalf internship program, during which time she made Downstream. Downstream traces the path of water from farm fields to a fishing town on Lake Erie, where fertilizer runoff impacts local economies. And the film follows a Corn Belt farmer, Jeff, as he works to keep fertilizers out of water and in the soil where it helps the crops to grow. So directly after the film, we'll have a panel discussion about water security with our distinguished panelists. And then we'll take some questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to put your questions in there anytime throughout the screening or the discussion. And now please enjoy Downstream by Ellen Askey.
I love what this is a little 4-acre field, what this field can do and how it can improve just by treating it more like a resource that's been mistreated for a long time. And I know I'm protecting the soil and improving water quality. So.
Of course, we had previous big algae blooms, but going to the toxic level it did was something different. They called us, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and said, hey, tell everybody, don't drink the water. And it's like, you look at that and you say, what do you mean I can't drink my water? Unfortunately, we're talking about the farm community, which obviously, they have to make food. We understand that.
Feel alone.
There's always a learning curve, and I will never diminish that and would gladly share my mistakes with people, but you just continually see new reason after new reason after new reason, and all of them are improving water quality. While improving the bottom line for the farmer, it just takes a big shift in saying we're going to try
What I
this.
need is you to hum while I settle my dams with that empty hell, with that empty hell.
Water does not respect property lines. If I do a good job on my field, but I'm taking water from the neighbor, his water flows towards me, then regardless how well I do, it's going to impact the next guy. So water doesn't respect boundary lines. It just goes where it's naturally going to go, which is the way gravity takes it.
Thank you to Ellen Askey for her very thoughtful film. And so now I'd like to begin our panel discussion, and I will introduce our panelists. So to start, we have Supratik Guha, and Dr. Guha is a professor at the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering and senior advisor to Argonne National Laboratory's Physical Sciences and Engineering Division. And he leads the lab's microelectronics and quantum information science strategic efforts in that capacity. Supratik led the Center for Nanoscale Materials, a U.S. Department of Energy Office of Science user facility from 2015 to 2019. And before joining Argonne and the University of Chicago in 2015, he spent 20 years at IBM Research, where he last served as the Director of Physical Sciences. Sanjay Joshie has over 29 years of experience on issues around community institutions, national resource management, rural livelihoods, and disaster management. As the executive director of the Foundation for Ecological Security, he works towards the ecological restoration and conservation of land and water resources. Mr. Joshie is deeply invested in nurturing an inclusive and gender-sensitive work culture that embraces diversity, promotes respect and acceptance, and fosters distributed power, leadership, and learning at all levels and in all of the Foundation's endeavors. And Dinesh S. Yadav, hailing from a pilgrimage to Maheshwar in India, Mr. Yadav is a national award-winning film director and an alumnus of the Film and Television Institute of India. His critically acclaimed and national award-winning film, Turtle, released on Z5, is also his debut feature film, in which he has very soulfully and skillfully woven the subject of water scarcity. His other film, the Bollywood feature Va Zindagi, is also on Z5, and it has a music track launched by the legendary A.R. Rahman, and is also a socially relevant film. So we'll begin the panel discussion with some questions, and I would very much like to encourage you to please enter your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. And we'll start by asking, I'd like to ask the panelists, what connections, if any, did the film that we just saw make to your region's water issues? And Sanjay, I thought perhaps we could begin with you.
Thank you, Nancy. One, it was a great movie in terms of covering the different aspects of, say, water. Water, where I see a kind of a connection in the area that we operate in. Because FES operates in the rural areas of India. So our core work lies in the villages of India, whereby I also see the similar kind of connections when we talk about a continuum, when we talk about the forest, the agriculture lands, and the water bodies. So the film also kind of highlighted all those issues, that these are all interconnected elements. You can't isolate one from the other. So that's how water needs to be seen in a holistic manner, in a continuum when we talk about different livelihoods, different kind of land uses. So that's where I see a very much conceptual kind of coherence with the work that we do and the situation we are operating in. Rather than, the situation was very different. It's America, but what we do is very different in rural India. So on that front, it is very different, but it touched all the issues, all the threads of life in terms of how water flows, what are the different challenges one sees when water flows at a particular speed, what crops could do, what the vegetative cover can change in terms of the way the water looks like when it goes to the downstream. The relation between downstream and the upstream kind of farmers. Those are the critical elements that the film touched. And these are the elements that we very well see and very clearly see in the villages and the areas that we operate in.
Thank you. Dinesh, did you have any thoughts on that as well? Connections to your region and regions you've dealt with? Sorry, Dinesh, you're muted.
Am I audible now?
Okay. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
no problem.
So just wanted to add on something with Sir's words, because first of all, this film is really very good film, and it's the very necessary film for the time, this time actually, the time we are living in right now. So when I see this film, I very much related to my area where I was living in my childhood. So I used to go to my cousin's place, it was in a nearby village, and we used to enjoy a lot of, because we were kids and we were roaming around farms and everywhere, so there was there was a time when, where there was a big pond, and it has a lot of water. So they could cultivate, they could, water their crops and all. But after a point, the pond got some kind of, shells, and I don't know what do you call it exactly, the algae or what is what. And slowly the quality of water was decreasing, and after a point it was not even they were not even able to fetch the water from the pond and pour it to their fields. And after few years, maybe in 5 or 6 years, I'm talking about 2008 or something, and at that time they migrated from that village to the cities, because of the same problem. So yes, I mean, this is very much relatable, with our region also. That's what I can say. Yeah.
Interesting that it was just it sounds like a pretty short span. It sounded like 5 or 6 years over which the quality of the water changed. It's not a very long time, really.
Yeah, I'm talking about around 8. I mean, like 12 years, perhaps, or 10 years. And this is like, and it was scary. They are migrated from village to city, and they had no place to stay in the city and no work to do. A family was in so much trouble, and then things happened, and somehow they settled down. But what was scary was like leaving their own place, just because of this water problem. So yeah, so I can completely, relate it from that. Although the guy is doing a lot to harvest, to improve the quality of water and everything, but here nobody is aware of that, and no technology, or you can say, education is there, so they are not able to somehow clean the pond or water of the pond. So yeah, I mean, this is what I personally feel. Relate.
Supratik, now you've lived in several different regions, so I'm not sure which would, if this would apply to all of them, but I wonder if you have some thoughts on that as well. Oh, sorry, Supratik, you're also muted. We were also conscientious about muting for the film. So,
yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Not at all.
Thanks, Nancy. I was wondering what answer I would give because I don't know where I come from anymore. So, but there are many there are differences certainly in water pollution, its impact in, say, India, US, and different countries, but there are also commonalities. I mean, my first experience with this business of water pollution came when I was growing up in India. I grew up in Calcutta, and there used to be deep tube wells that supplied the water, and there was arsenic contamination that would come from the wells. At that time in the 70s, this was not known, but there'd be many children with lesions beneath their feet, which today has been boiled back to arsenic contamination, right? That was my first kind of experience with what water can do. Insofar, I really enjoyed the movie. I felt Ellen, this is her second movie that I'm seeing, and I've been very impressed. It points to the right issues. The thing that comes to mind is nitrogen contamination, nitrates, and it is a classic example of the complexity of this problem and why we are having difficulty in dealing with it, because it is a combination of a scientific problem, it is a combination of a social problem and a regulatory problem across the world. Take nitrogen, right? We cannot measure nitrogen accurately in soil cheaply. This is one problem. So like you saw that farmer show little roots with little bulbs coming out, showing that's excess nitrogen in the soil. Well, that's because one reason is we don't know how to accurately measure it. Even in the US, on average, there is a measurement of soil taken once every 6 weeks, every acre and a half, and that is not enough, right? And that is because, crops are they're not a high profit item, right? Wheat is about $600 per, I think, acre in this country, right? India, the numbers are different. The second issue is regulation, right? Nitrogen is over applied. Why? Because almost every country subsidizes it. India, the US for sure, right? So come here July when the seedling is, a few inches and really the sun is up there and it needs to grow next 6 weeks, the farmer will come and over apply nitrogen because it's cheap for him or her. Then the rains come, it washes some of the nitrogen. So the guy comes back and puts it again, right? And so it's over applied. So this is the second issue, the regulations, right? So it's regulation, science, and then the third is the social impact that we saw algal bloom, et cetera, et cetera. But we in this world have focused on, specializations, and engineers focus on building their stuff. Social scientists don't use scientific data enough. right? And regulatory guys do what they do. To solve a problem like this, and nitrogen is the classic example, but this is across water, this is across environmental pollution. This integration needs to happen. We are going to be able to measure things a lot better than what we can. We need to use this.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Now you're just talking about nitrogen. This is just one tiny aspect
Just
of the
one
problem, right? Right.
Given the documentary, it's a good example.
Sanjay, you started to talk about the differences that from between the problem that was depicted in the film, which is a United States problem, and the problems in India. And I wondered if you might speak a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. Even what Saurav was speaking, I was kind of feeling like chipping in terms of because the context that we work in, say, especially I'm talking about from the work that we do at FES, we are in areas which still have more conventional kind of an agriculture that is practiced. So the dependence on each of the land use, for example, the uplands, when we talk about the forest lands. So still there is a relation between the community staying over there and the forest, not just for direct benefits in terms of, say, a minor forest produce collection of, say, some varieties of vegetables and all. But when we look at from the ecological perspective, there's a lot of flows that happens from those forests to the farmlands in terms of the nutrient that along with the runoff water that comes from the forest. With good cover, good forest cover, we see a good healthy ecosystem, a good healthy agriculture being practiced in those areas without too much of intervention in terms of what Saurav was mentioning in terms of the artificial or chemical fertilization happening over there. But when we look at the whole process, the way agriculture is practiced maybe in US and the way agriculture is being practiced in the areas that we are is very different. India happens to be a large country as well as with a too much of a diversity. Even when we talk about farming, farming will be, there will be big landlords, big farmers who will do cash crop, who will be guzzling water out of the land. And there will be a complete imbalance between the usage of natural resources by a big farmer compared to a small farmer. A small farmer is about subsistence. It's about subsistence agriculture, which largely is only primarily to feed his or her family. That is the basic work that they do when it comes to agriculture. So the dependence on natural resources is far more compared to a big landlord, a big farmer. And that too, not artificially done. They believe more in, say, rains and the water that accumulates because of the rain in small ponds, tanks that are there in those regions, and they use that water to cultivate those lands. So the whole methodology is very different compared to a big farmer who might be going in for tube wells or deep wells and pumping water out, putting in more cash crops, changing the cropping patterns for that region, creating a more water stress in that particular area. Just a small example I would give of a state like Karnataka in India. It's one of the biggest states. Once the Karnataka had a very good chain of tanks. It was known for its tank management, and there was traditional tank water management using Nirganti. That's a local person who manages the water in terms of the usage of water. With time and the degradation of these traditional practices, what we see today are silted tanks, improper management of these tanks. There have regulations been formed, the policies have come in, but overall the management of the tanks has gone. So when we look at these areas were rich in terms of the traditional knowledge, the traditional methods of managing and governing these issues of water, around natural resources, over the period have degraded largely because of the reasons humans are to be blamed for the kind of mental shifts that we have created in the society, that people can't manage their own resources and it's the government who will do it. So those are the issues which we need to really see, and which are very different from the one that the film was highlighting on. I was talking about the conceptual front in terms of how the water flows from one area to the other area, how these are interconnected issues, what the films were highlighting on, and that's very similar.
Thank you. So Sanjay, you started to touch upon just again one aspect of what is the cause of water insecurity, and I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about the major causes. Is it industrial contamination? Is it contamination by society? Is it government intervention, this loss of historical traditions of keeping the land and water sustainable? And I'm wondering if Dinesh, maybe you could speak a little bit about that. You certainly know something about that, as we could see from Turtle, which I very much enjoyed, by the way.
Thank you so much. Well, I think this question still scares me a lot, when we talk about either industrial contamination or contamination by the society, because in both the cases we are talking about water only here, and we are somehow we are polluting water, by both the sides, like the society side also, the industry side also, Up now, I was reading, like when we were talking, like when I got the questions, when I was reading about this thing, I just got to know that 70% of the clean water we need for agriculture purpose, right? And what actually farmers or we are doing is we are putting a lot of fertilizers and pesticides in this water, and somehow this water is going down to the to the earth inside, and somehow again what we are doing, we are pumping this water out and using it. So somewhere we need to understand, or somewhere we need to do something to make people aware that what can be other, like Sanjay sir was saying that before the natural resources was were good to use, like they were not using chemicals, and they were not using that kind of fertilizers which pollutes the water right now. So what I personally think is, instead we should talk about the solutions of this thing. I mean, how can we make a way where we can produce a lot of food without using chemicals, and as well as how can we educate the society, to not waste, their waste in a natural water sources. Because I was reading like 80% of our garbage we are throwing it in a clean water, or different type of, like either in lakes or ponds or oceans or rivers, So this is what I personally think, that we need to somewhere educate ourselves, educate our society, or educate our farmers, to come on the same page and save the water. This is, I personally think, my point.
Supratik, what are some of the major sources that you've come across in your work, the major sources of contamination of water?
So, on the agricultural aspect, the big contamination is nitrates. Phosphates can also contaminate, and that comes from fertilizer. Removal of the aquifers, the charging of the aquifers, so drawing out more water than what is going in, is not exactly contamination, but this is a big issue, at least in the US, it's particularly in the western parts of the US. For me, I'm not quite aware of the situation in India. Perhaps Sanjay could comment on that. I'd be very interested in knowing. On the other aspects is the industrial pollution and city pollution. So, I am familiar with some of the pollution aspects in some of the cities because we have measured it. Right? So in Delhi is a classic example. The Yamuna has been badly polluted. If you look at Yamuna near the old Delhi part, it's going from the Wazirabad bridge and below. There are 7 drains that come from the old Delhi that come into what will be the west bank of the Yamuna. And that over the years, and talking to people there, and making measurements, is very, very badly polluted. And, so that is a huge issue. City pollution comes and industry pollution. There are 2 things, right? One is organics. From industry pollution. PFOS is one of the items that people talk about. Measuring those cheaply and accurately is very difficult. Right? The other, particularly in the Indian context, is fecal contamination. Again, there are not enough fecal wastewater treatment plants. So if you look, for instance, in a city, small city that drains into the river, the contamination levels jump up in the evenings. When people come back home and they are using domestic water in their house for various purposes. You can actually measure that. So those are the 2 things that we have seen.
Thank you. Sanjay, you looked like you were going to say something about aquifers or something that Supratik was talking about.
Yeah, the problem is not, I don't disagree with the fact that industrial pollution and contamination is one big problem. But when I talk to the situation, what we see at the rural areas, it's not just contamination, it's about the availability of water. The quality comes, the question of quality is not arising over there because the availability is a big question. The question is because of the situation over there, the way degradation has happened in terms of the forests, the traditional practices, the cropping patterns have changed, and more water is being extracted out of the ground. So those are the basic issues about how I look into the way the water scenario is kind of building up. Climate change issues, one talks very, one can say openly now, because it is now visible that everything is in front of us, leading to erratic rain. Sometimes there's no rain in the peak agriculture season, and then the rain comes with high intensity. When we talk about how the aquifers are going to be recharged, how the groundwater is going to be recharged, there is a role which vegetation plays over there, and we have cut down our forests. So how will the water percolate inside the ground? It is running off. It is running off to maybe streams and then finally flowing out into the ocean because we don't harvest water to that level. So it's important to understand the water scenario in a full, you can say, rounded manner. Even say the question about urban areas. If I look at Mumbai, the main water source of Mumbai is the upland. Poor farmers have to suffer to actually feed Mumbai with water. So there's thousands of villages from where the water comes in. And when we look at the situation of the villages, these are tribal poor villages which don't have water for themselves. So largely this is the issue which talks about when we talk about water and the role of, you can say, the recognition to the ecosystem services that the upland farmers are being able to provide. And this is good quality water, which later on gets contaminated because of human interventions like industrialization or various things. So that is another issue which is bothering, at least I can talk about India very much, because we don't recognize that. We don't recognize the life, the importance, the struggles of the people in the uplands who are contributing to water for the downstream people. How how are we kind of reimbursing those things? How are we remunerating these people for the conservation work that they do on the uplands, for protecting those forests? So there is no kind of recognition for those kind of things, and we just force them not to construct a dam in their village for their own purposes, because this is a feeder. It feeds into the larger dam downstream. So it's like an imbalance when we talk even about the usage of water. The same imbalance which happens because of the economic aspect. It also happens because of certain usage aspect that you need water at the expense of someone else. So these are another issues which talks about water security in different areas. There was a very interesting statistics which was shared by my colleague, that when we look at the groundwater map of the country, India, it's based on 15,000 observation wells across the country. So looking at the landmass of India and having just 15,000 wells which are monitoring the groundwater movements year on year, and we are extrapolating and creating a scenario out of that, what kind of decision making will be making on the groundwater situation in the country? So that is something we need to see at the policy level, at the practice level also, how these situations can improve, how these situations can change, how can we bring more equality even in the usage of water at the basic level of the village. And but we can't say we can't feed the people in the cities also, but how do we manage the whole thing to be a win-win kind of a situation?
Thank you. We're starting to get some questions in, so I want to encourage people to continue to ask questions in the Q&A, or some people are putting them in the chat. That's great. And we'll go to questions in just a few minutes. But I wanted to, all of you touched upon something I think very critical, which is that it requires a change in behavior on the part of many, many people. So there are a couple of questions I have about that. First of all, if you're a person who's struggling to feed your family, I imagine, this is not my area of expertise, I think you're all more expert in this, that it's very hard to listen to an environmentalist or a scientist or really anyone about changing your behavior. So that's sort of one issue, is why should they listen? And why should they consider changing behavior when, again, it's just a day-to-day existence? And then the other thing is the difficulty of change. I think even when people, many people want to say, stop smoking. And it's aside from nicotine addiction and the scientific aspect of that, it's just enormously difficult for us to change our behavior. And so I'm curious about some of the suggestions that some of you may have about how we can start to implement change, whether it is for someone who is living day to day or the population at large. How do we get people to change their behavior? Because it sounds like that's really, really what's required, whether it's the government level on the individual level. So if you wouldn't mind speaking to that a little bit, Supratik.
Would you explain that one more time?
Oh, sure. I just am curious about how do we get people to change their behavior? Because it sounds, everybody is touching upon what's required. And it sounds like behavior, in order to try to address the problem of water security, we need changes on the government level and on the individual level. But how do we get people to change? Because that is just so challenging.
Yeah, again, I'm a scientist and technologist, so I have to stay within the area of my expertise. So let me just give my answer from the science point of view, right? I think the best way to change behavior is to produce reliable data and show it and share it. The rest needs to be a sort of commitment from the community and the government and the regulatory bodies. I think it is only now that we are beginning to appreciate, and accept the fact that these are serious issues. In the documentary, I think there was one point where the farmer says that the next generation will push further out. That's very true. But it is going to be very difficult changing this behavior.
Thank you. Dinesh, do you have some thoughts about that?
Yeah, Nancy, I would like to point out something here. I personally feel that we don't need to target those people who are, earning for their, to feed their family. I personally think that we should actually target the people who are using water in a big quantity, like farmers I'm talking about, or industrialists who are using the water, like more water, instead of a common man who is using less water in his home for his family, So because once we target the large amount of people, the mass audience, the mass like users, then it will be easy to shift to the to layman, and to make him understand that okay, it is important because the whole ecosystem is changing because of this. And if you see, if you watch my film, I started my film with the quote. It says that I'll just read it out. A folktale is a fabrication of anecdotes by our ancestors in the past, forcing our parents of the eventualities in our future. That means our forefathers, our ancestors have already warned us about the situations, which are going to happen in future. And because I can't find a new way to teach them or to educate them. So what I tried in my film is I bring out this folktale kind of stuff from in my film, so that I just want to through that I want to tell them that okay, this is water, and we Indians pray for this water, and our ancestors have already warned us about the water scarcity in future, through their folktales, and the same way, the same things that whatever they have explained in their folktales or their words. Like there was a poet in our Indian culture. It's called Rahim Singh, Sant Rahim. He said that Sanjay sir may translate it. Rahiman pani rakhe bin pani sab soon. That means he says in his poet is a quote that you should keep water safe, because without water you will be nowhere in the world, And what I personally felt when I was researching about the water in my region, we believe that we have a 5,000-year-old culture, And what I found is, if I remove just one element, which is water, from this 5,000-year-old culture, the whole culture will collapse within few hours, maybe 48 hours. They will start fighting, and that's what my film talks about. It will start from like one neighborhood, then it will go to one village, then it will go to country, and then countries will fight for it. So you need to save the water, and this is my way to change their behavior. This is what I was trying to through this film. I was quoting in this film, and this is what my way was to change in their behavior. Now, I personally feel that we need to make a lot of films like this, and government should actually come in front and very eager, especially to make more PSAs, more films, and more campaigns to educate them. This is what I personally think, Nancy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So storytelling is a really good motivator. Sanjay, you do so much on the ground work. What's your take on how we could get people to start to change their behavior?
Number one point on the behavioral change, generally we expect others to change their behavior rather than we begin changing ourselves. So that is the biggest, one can say, hurdle when we talk about behavioral change. So why it is difficult? Because we don't change. And we expect people who are already struggling to make a living to change their behavior. Whereas the big question will be whose behavior needs to be changed. It's about the society needs to change their behavior. The first thing that comes to my mind is to understand water as a common property resource rather than private property. Because generally people believe that I have a legitimate right over a particular land. So I have a legitimate right to exploit everything down under that piece of land. Whether it is water, whether it's coal, whether it is marble, anything under that land because I have the legitimate right. So one needs to understand the whole theory behind common property resource management, and water happens to be one. So that is one mental shift that we need to make, that water happens to be a common property and it has to be looked like that. It can't be a private property anymore. There's a behavioral change that we need to bring in. We need to also influence to make the payment for ecosystem services a reality rather than just a concept. In India, some of the scientists have already started working on it in terms of coming up with models on payment for ecosystem services, but yet a far-fetched dream, one can say, to happen in a very near future. I'm not 100% sure on that. The third part, I see that there's a behavioral change. Simple steps. Decision making should be data driven rather than just be on the hunch of a person or a leader or an engineer or a village leader. So there has to be some degree of analysis of data that is available, or if it is not available, data needs to be generated when we talk about how water security issues can be dealt, how water management should be done, and we should give equal emphasis on the collective choices of the people, the community rights, the community management and governance principles that used to exist in these regions. How do we kind of rekindle those thought process that used to exist in those villages? Those are the kind of behavioral changes that we need to bring in. And more importantly, I would say the way urban cities are using water, certainly those are the issues of water consumption, which we need to optimize rather than maximize. So those are the thoughts that immediately come to mind when we talk about the behavioral part of it. But it's a long drawn thing. Dr. Guha said clearly that this is one of the most difficult things to kind of bring in a behavioral change. One can't even change the behavior in terms of switching off the light once they are out of the room. It's as simple as that.
Very true. Very true.
Nancy, can I make a quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this comment, Sanjay, that you made about paying for the costs involved by raising money in other ways through business models, I think is a very, very good one, right? And this is where, again, measuring things can really help. I'll give you an example that worked very well in India. At least it worked in my city of Calcutta with traffic mounted cameras. You jump a red light, a ticket comes to you automatically, okay? As a result, okay, you can go to the government and say, look, this is a business that will pay for itself and you will make money. You could do the same thing in India. In India today, an industrial company that, let's say, has its drains on the river, it self-manages, okay? It qualifies itself for, if I'm not mistaken, for its environmental compliance. You could measure things in the river. And if these are well calibrated, you can send a fine automatically by email or whatever, right? This can be a self-managed business model. So once you start measuring things, you can see who is going out of compliance. these technologies are coming, right? There has to be an appetite. The issue that has happened with water, as far as I have seen from my limited experience, is that there is a status quo, right? People are comfortable. And so nobody wants to move because it's to nobody's benefit. You can talk to ministers many times. They are very engaged. They are truly motivated and passionate about it. But then at some point, the problem statement goes down to the bureaucracy, and there it just gets absorbed, right? I have seen this in India. I have also kind of seen indications of this here, right? So there is a big, in science, electrical engineering, we call it capacitance of the system.
Thank you.
Just to add a small point over here, we have also tried many things, because when I remember when I was working on ground, we used to very wonder where to construct a water harvesting structure. Because I come from a background which I don't understand the water scenario, I don't understand the groundwater, the ground geology and all. And we used to always talk about it where the structure will be built, and the people used to tell us construct over here, and we used to feel that how they are imagining where the water will come, where the water will go, which well it's going to recharge. So we built a tool called CLAT, which is about Common Land Assessment and Restoration Tool, which draws different algorithms together and comes up with a color-coded map for the people to see where they are standing in terms of whether it's a recharge zone, whether it's a surface storage zone, or a moderate recharge zone. So these are this kind of a tool then was adopted even by the government of Meghalaya, who are building the capacities of the grassroots worker to be planning better. So it's a decision that they take based on certain knowledge of the particular land, based on some data that has been collected from different sources. And it's all government data, the algorithms on geology, land use, land type, the rainfall, and it comes up with a map. So people are planning on it, people are discussing on it, where they are constructing. So decision making is becoming more informed, rather than you wonder after the rain falls that we constructed a structure for surface storage and resulting in only recharge and recharging someone outside the village as well. So these are the kind of changes in behavior one needs to do. Appreciate technology, appreciate the use of technology in the decision making, but don't bank on technology to be eroding the human angle also. A balance has to be made when you talk about decision and the work we do. What Dinesh was mentioning in terms of people migrating out of the village, these are not just issues around water. These are issues about growing population, growing dependence on the same piece of land, which is now fragmented into very small pieces, and agriculture becoming unviable to sustain that large population that's there. So somewhere we need to think on these elements also, how livelihoods at the village level needs to shape up, so that we can reduce the dependency on the cities. People might migrate to cities, but not to live a life of a king, but to live a life of real misery also. Because life doesn't come so naturally in terms of they become labor. Unskilled people coming to the cities finally land in, you can say, very mean jobs that they do also, rather than cultivating their own farmlands, being independent. So somewhere we need to figure out that livelihood kind of analysis at each of the location to be keeping a balance on the usage part of it also. It's not just that it's a problem. It's a problem which has, you can say, multiple kind of folds. It's a complex problem. Some people call it a wicked problem also, that it can't be solved with one kind of intervention. It has to be looked at a very holistic manner.
Thank you. There's a related question that's come in, and again, I want to encourage people who are viewing to please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. So this is one question that came in. Sanjay brings a key question about environmental justice issues that are not often considered in water security discussions. Often the burden of poor water quality and water availability falls on the poor, and they have very little capacity to adapt. This would require a significant role of government and policymakers. How do you organize community scale interest in this and bring appropriate agencies to act? Sanjay, do you want to take a stab at that?
Number one, we haven't done a lot of work on that, but certainly what we have been able to successfully demonstrate in the villages is, it's not just one area, in many states and many villages that we have been able to do is in situ conservation of water, to create structures in the villages and create, in a way, revive the rivers that used to flow from the villages by construction of water harvesting structure, creating collective governance rules of water usage, as well as when we talk about water usage, it's not just for agriculture. So people have graduated kind of rules when you talk about a tank management. Initially, if the tank is full, they use it for agriculture purpose also. But when it comes down to a certain level, they restrict it to livestock and human drinking. And when it goes below, it's only for human drinking. So that's how people have been managing. But when we talk about certainly the issues of villages and cities, we certainly lack that expertise in terms of our experience in negotiating between the two. That's something big, but certainly on the agenda of how we evaluate these ecosystem services, we are learning on that particular field. Once we have collected data, in terms of the biomass, the carbon kind of situation, the water governance part of it, but how that influences the downstream farmers, how that influences the downstream cities that exist in that particular region. Those are something which still eludes us in terms of our intervention and our work. But certainly this is something very interesting for us and very important for us as well, to build a debate around water and water governance when we talk about the larger water scenario in the country.
Thank you. Another question that came in, and this might be for you, Supratik. Can genetically modified crops help? This is going back to our discussion about water scarcity and farming. Can genetically modified crops help? And is there another problem in the stigma regarding modified plants?
Well, this is again something that is a little beyond my expertise, but yes, I mean, using genetically modified crops, if this can help on the resource management, that is certainly a good thing, right? But you don't know what you're giving up on this, right? And that is where the social stigma comes in. Mm-hmm. The other issue with genetically modified crops comes down to this whole business of intellectual property in crops, where a company will sell you seeds, but then you cannot use those seeds to, you have to buy seeds again in a certain cadence. So those then again become social issues, regulatory issues, legal issues. It's a very, very complicated area. There is, genetic modified meats, at least in certain sections of society, people are now moving away from it. Genetically modified crops, on the other hand, is not a bad thing either, right? Research on crops and scientifically altering things is not a bad thing. It led to India's Green Revolution in the 1960s, right? And that was aided by US and Mexican scientists, for instance. So it's not a bad thing, but there are issues and it needs to be sorted out.
Thank you. Another question that's come in, and we touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything more to say about this, do you think that part of the issue in allocation of water around the country, and this is referring to India, is that there is no consistent system for pricing water. Are there efforts being made to consistently price water in India? I don't know, any thoughts, maybe Sanjay?
Urban drinking water certainly is priced, but when we look at largely and water which is supplied by pipes by government, that is priced when we talk about drinking water. But when we talk about my land, my borewell, there is no price on it. I can pump out anything. So there's no price. And people, scientists have been trying to quantify these services, ecosystem services that are being applied, and looking at what price the people are paying to supply these services to the downstream people. So these are only the efforts in terms of how do we quantify, what are the methodologies, what kind of results are coming in, ones that are more prominent, one can take it to the decision makers to showcase that. But at the moment, I see a kind of pricing that is being done on. There are regulations. The regulations about where you can dig a bore well, where you can't. But beyond that, it's not there.
Thank you. If you were put in charge of water management for your particular region, for where you're living now, what is the first thing you would do to work toward a solution? Dinesh?
Well, perhaps first thing I will do is I'll bind people, to perhaps I will import a law on them to have a water harvesting system. This is what actually I think, because we are taking out a lot of water from the earth, and what is happening especially in India is like the rainwater is just because in small villages and towns we can see that when it's raining, the flood comes and water goes in the ocean without any use. So what I personally think is, though I'm not an expert, but still I personally think is that this water harvesting system can help a bit, And the other thing is, I'll perhaps make it compulsory to send one person from each family to go and work in small ponds and or maybe perhaps watershed systems to just make them understand the value of water, because only after that people will be aware of the water problem. This is what I personally think, actually. Nancy, that's it.
Thank you. Supratik?
Yeah, I think I agree with Dinesh there. I would look into water management and education regarding water and its value, bringing it up to the consciousness, right? The things like water harvesting, things like being more acceptive of gray water recycling, which there's stigmas associated with that, at least in the West, in certain places. Then, things, understanding that doing things in one place impacts water at a very different place. Right? So I'll give you an example from the state of Assam, where my house is now. I have a house in Guwahati. My parents lived there. They passed away now. But there is a river called Brahmaputra there, and it is supplied by a tributary called Bharali. Bharali is one of the most polluted rivers in all of Assam. What happens is that these tributaries come from Meghalaya. So there's somebody mines some stone, there's a stone quarry or something set up there. That stuff comes and contaminates quality. Right? This happens all over the place. That judgment, right? How do you quantify that? How do you manage that? You can't stop people from setting up a stone quarry, people need jobs, etc. But again, maybe business models can come in, right? San Antonio, Texas is a lovely example where you had the riverfront and you turned it into a commercial area and you make money, right? And maybe you can use that money to clean up the water. I was thinking, these kinds of places near Guwahati is a fast growing city, that riverfront could be turned around and cleaned up and made to be an income source as well by being a commercial center. So I think there could be opportunities for it. I think end of the day, to fix this problem, you have to put in clever business models, right? This is one way of doing this.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and Sanjay, what would be your first thing to do if you were put in touch of water management for your region?
I've touched upon few things. Is to one, create a kind of a data, a more informed kind of decision-making processes in that area. That is the first kind of a behavioral change that one needs to have to understand the land, of lay of the land, understand the usage, understand the stakeholders who are highly dependent on that particular resource, and then start the process of water management. And water management can't happen without the involvement of the people who actually use it. You can't have administrators sitting on top of you and deciding that this is how you need to do. So there has to be a kind of equal share of people on the ground actually in the governance part of it. So if that governance happens very effectively, I think one can have a better water security issues in a particular location. And scientific knowledge coupled up with the traditional wisdom that exists, that is something which needs to be balanced in each of the locations. So those are the thoughts that come to my mind in terms of how one needs to look at the whole issue of better management of water in a particular location. And there is an element of accountability that needs to be set in. We feel that we are, even for the government part of it, we are the peak government, we are the bureaucrats. But what is about the accountability that you have for the people that you serve? We only say that we are servants, but we are not servants actually. So that is something, a mindset shift needs to be done, that people can manage, people can control their own resources. That is how, what Dinesh was mentioning as an education, I would say education to bring in a behavioral change across the society. That needs to happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we just have about a minute left, and I want to just take this opportunity to thank Lenny and Suman at the center and the center itself in Delhi, and Dinesh, Supratik, and Sanjay. Thank you so much. And thanks to our audience for tuning in and sharing their thoughts with us. I guess I will wish you all a happy World Water Day, and thank you again for talking with us about water security. It's vitally important. So
Thank you very much, Nancy.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye now.